think, again, most people often think about literacy as being focusing on teaching children to read early, and it's definitely not about that at all. As I was saying, it's thinking about vocabulary knowledge, it's about sentence complexity, it's helping children really think about their narrative skills, so how they're describing, interacting with people, their phonological awareness and listening and their comprehension. So those are, to me, what literacy skills are. It's not about, a child is fine if they recognise their letters, because we know there are times where children might perfectly know their alphabet, but actually they don't have strong phonological awareness. And so it's the understanding of the sounds and being able to hear differences. So between cat and cap, and the fact that there are 3 sounds within cat, that they can hear that they can hear that there's syllables. If we hear and are effectively really understanding the words around us, that really then supports, that is laying the base for being able to read later at school. And so it's not about us trying to bring curriculum earlier to children, although you can if that child is particularly wanting an extension, for example, but that's not the point. It's about making sure we've really intentionally put those building blocks in so they can hear the sounds, they're playing with sounds, they're thinking about syllables. That is what is most important, that phonological awareness, to be able to, before they start to decode words when they get to school. I think another misconception, again, is around that trying to formalize school into ECE. We don't need to formalize it. It really is about hearing rhymes, as I said, like really sounding out syllables, identifying different sounds, playing with different blends of sounds. So, if I'm, just even those things about sh and ch, all of those sounds, can they actually verbalize those sounds? Can they hear those sounds? And then you can go chocolate, so they're hearing what these blends are and translating them onto a word that they might already know as well. So those are probably the 2 key misconceptions, is around people feeling that it means drilling alphabets and worksheets, and that is what we mean by it, or that's also what success looks like. When I think about maths, for example, in early learning, we can be using, it's good to know numbers because they're all around us and it's important to know, but actually it's about understanding what those numbers are for. If we're thinking about using blocks are one of our best mathematical tools in early childhood, because we're talking about shapes and spatial awareness, and we can use them to stack them and measure how much taller something is. Or is it shorter? Is it wider? Is it longer? So we're building in vocabulary as well as mathematical concepts. So those are, that's what's so fun. And then you can measure your body and how many hands, and we can still count in that way. But counting is only one small segment of what, of what maths is. I actually just think, again, about having fun with words is great. Like, I love being in the family play area with children, and you might be sitting down and you're having a conversation with them around, you're at a cafe and we're serving, oh, what are you eating? And, and so we're trying to develop those conversational skills. But then I love doing things like, oh, this is a divine and delicious donut, so we're using alliteration. I mean, a child's going to capture that, like, what did you say? And so we're making fun with words. We're using what might think is much bigger words than for young children, but they love it. And the more that we expose them to different vocab, they absorb it. We know they're sponges, and we're making words fun. And so they might come up with something else. I might say, Sam the slippery slug. So if I'm outside, again, if we're out, in the bush or we're in the playground and we're looking for bugs, well, I might try to name the bugs with alliteration, because I'm really getting those sounds coming through. So really using that, I think, is a wonderful fun, but they're learning about those at the same time. And I guess maybe another practice, as I said, would be that quality of talk. So really intentionally thinking about, am I using open-ended questions? How am I drawing out, especially if you have a child who maybe doesn't verbalize or vocalize quite so much. How am I pausing and waiting and encouraging them to respond and making space for that. And then really intentionally thinking about how can you ask them some questions that they might be able to respond to. That serve and return, and again, just make sure that you're thinking about your language in a less transactional and functional way, and much more about talk about what you're doing. Again, that sort of when I'm building something together, I'm telling them what I'm doing, what I'm seeing, how it feels, and that's giving them the language for when they are doing the same thing. So talk, but talk with purpose. So you're thinking about, I guess it's a little bit thinking about like a tennis game, isn't it? Where you're sort of lobbing the ball and then it's coming back to you. So it really is where you're throwing a question out to a child. But even if you're thinking about an infant, we can pick up our Pepe and we can say, oh, good morning. Isn't it a beautiful day? And then you can sit and you can pause, and you might see either through their body language or through their vocalizations that you're allowing space for them to return. And again, that will obviously change as they grow older, as they start to vocalize more. But it's waiting for the return, and whichever way that might look like. And sometimes, as I said, it could be an eye. It might even look at you in a different way. Perhaps even some of those children that are really reluctant to speak. If they're looking at you, that is a sign of a return. And you say, oh, I see you. You seem interested in that. How about, would you like to do X, Y, and Z? So really taking the time to engage in that. I'm going to pose a question or an observation and wait for you to respond. So it's much more about giving and then responding, but knowing that it's not always, it can be non-verbal as well. That's what communication is, right? It's not just the words, it's our whole way in which we communicate it.